Every film has to have a 3-act structure, even if it is a non-linear film. Babel is no exception to this. And it starts with the death of Richard and Susan Jones' child, an event that no parent would want to experience, and an event that kickstarts Babel. And it starts with a relationship tainted by misfortune. Richard suggested a trip to a foreign country, a country drastically contrasting California, a country that was dubbed the name of Morocco. With the destination pinpointed, Richard and Susan left the safety of their confined home and journeyed to the corner of Africa, leaving both of their kids behind, with a trusted caretaker, oblivious to fate's fangs. On the barren lands of Morocco, a family of 7 lives in a house constructed by mud and bricks. Each day passes by leaving nothing but poverty, sweat, and tears behind, drastically contrasting the life of Richard and Susan. With a haphazard and tiresome life, a decision was made. A decision to buy a gun. A hunter, Najib, is called upon by the Abdullah's family. They were going to make a transaction for the gun. 900 dirham was the price offered at first, and Abdullah, the father of the family, retorted with a deal of 500 dirham and 1 singular goat. And with that, the deal was made. With the gun bestowed upon their family, Abdullah takes his 2 sons outside the house to practice with the gun. And it was discovered that his youngest son, Yusuf, had more aptitude for the gun compared to his older brother, Ahmed, a talent that would only exacerbate their unfortunate fate. The gun was entrusted to both of them, as long with the task to kill any pests that were to harm the goats. A weapon capable of murder and destruction was handed to these 2 kids, these 2 ignorant kids. This was the point of no return, for the inciting incident in Babel. Richard and Susan boards their bus after a stop at a local restaurant, and at the same time, the 2 kids climbed up a mountain to test their rifle. And by coincidence, both of these parties unknowingly meet, one in a bus, another with a gun on a hill aimed at the bus. Previously in the restaurant, Susan had asked Richard for the reason of this trip. The obvious answer was to fix their marriage, was to fix their relationship. But is this trip really helping their relationship, or just creating a bigger rift between them? This is the part where Richard seems to have second thoughts. And as if to answer that very question, Yusuf pulls the trigger and the bullet flies and punctures Susan. This is where Act 1 ends. Act 2 begins with a wounded Susan Jones lying on the bus's rough floor, her white clothes drenched in red, and her body being cradled by Richard. All hope seems lost, but someone in the bus steps up. A volunteer named Anwar, exclaiming that he could bring them to his village for treatment. And going to the village is what they do. Carrying her, Richard followed Anwar, the volunteer. Behind them, a sea of children stopped, curious to see what befell the village. With Susan being laid down on the floor of her unknown house, a veterinary surgeon, not a human surgeon, visits her. And without anesthesia, he stitches her wounds while her screams of pain and unwillingness echo through the room. Richard tries to call his embassy for aid, but due to some political tension between these 2 countries, everything has been delayed. This is the first obstacle they faced. On the other side of the story, Yusuf and his brother cuts the day short, seemingly afraid of their actions. They choose to do daily chores around the house instead of hunting. As the father arrives home and as the sun sets, the family eats dinner in the house, and the father reveals a slightly incorrect news. A terrorist has killed an American tourist, sentence that embodies the theme of the movie. Richard grows more aggressive and desperate as Susan's condition worsens, with the bus leaving and the help of the embassy getting delayed. The hope of a survival rate is tipping to the side of death. With all hope seemingly vanishing, Richard does the only thing he can do: wait. Yusuf and Ahmad, on the other hand, attempts to hide the weapon of murder, hoping to cut ties with it entirely. Unfortunately, the Moroccan government have already dispatched the relevant authorities to catch the perpetrator, and the first person they catch is the individual who sold that very gun. He reveals that the gun was initially given to him by a Japanese hunter. He also reveals the location of Yusuf's family. The father eventually finds out about his children's deeds and proceeds to discipline them. He then instructs Yusuf and Ahmad to get the gun and follow him. The final mistake they make on their journey is when the authorities find them. They find three figures trekking along the sandy hills. They get down from the vehicles, and after a few exchange of words, a shootout ensues, and Ahmad gets shot, while Yusuf retorts back with a shot of his very own, killing an officer in the process. Eventually realizing his situation, Yusuf surrenders and begs the authorities to spare his family, a naive and desperate wish. On Richard's side, a helicopter descends upon the village. After an agonizing amount of time, Susan Jones is finally brought to the hospital to undergo a surgery with the undictated result of failure as success. And thus, Richard is made to wait again, and this time, he decides to phone home to hear his kids, to fulfill the promise he made to Susan. This is the midpoint of the story. On the other end of the phone stood Amelia, the caretaker of Richard's and Susan's children. She picked up the phone, and through it, Richard's hoarse voice could be heard. After some exchange of words, he requested to speak to his son, Mike. Only when Mike picks up the phone to engage in a casual conversation, we see Richard finally crying. "I'd be announced to anyone at the time another tragedy would befall the Joneses family, with the kids being the center of it all." A demand was made to Amelia the following day, asking her to take care of the kids on her day off. She exclaims that it is a son's wedding, though an exemption was never given. She makes the decision to take the kids to Mexico to attend the wedding with the kids. She calls a close relative, Santiago, to help them cross Mexico's border. Everything goes well at first. They cross the border and arrive at the wedding without a hitch. Both Amelia and Santiago seem excited, but the two kids are overwhelmed by Mexico's extravagant culture. The disaster occurs on the journey home at the gate that separates US and Mexico's land. Another country with very, very different political ideals. A check was made by the authorities stationed at the gate, a check that seemingly deemed them as suspicious individuals. Things quickly escalate, and finally Santiago decides to speed past through the gate into the darkness. When they gained a lead from the authorities, he instructed both the kids and Amelia to leave the car. It might have been in concern for the safety, but in reality they could never know. They trek through the night and eventually fall asleep under the tree until daylight hits them. Panicking, Amelia leaves the kids at the spot, genuinely promising them that she will return. And to some degree, she does return. She also manages to find help. She manages to catch the attention of an individual that was the police, a glimmer of hope that turned out to be danger. The police officer arrests her, and only after that do they try to search for the stranded children. A search that was unfruitful at first, but eventually, when Amelia was taken into custody, an officer reveals that they managed to find the two kids. But he also reveals that Amelia needed to be deported back to Mexico. She tries to fight the decision at first, but eventually, through her sobs, She accepts. This is where Act 2 ends. The third and final act of Babel is a story of a deaf girl, Chieko, trying to experience her teenage years. It is a story that is the least tragic out of the four, the story that is most touching and relatable. It starts with a loss though. Chieko's play in a volleyball match was determined to be a foul by the referee, a choice that was heavily contended by Chieko's team. Unfortunately though, the referee said it is final, and that choice he made cost them the game. Even with the loss in hand, she still looked forward to the J-pop concert after her match. Her father makes an appearance for the first time, and his looks exactly match the picture of the Japanese hunter that sold off his rifle. Unbeknownst to him, the very gun he sold off has caused political tension between Morocco and America to rise. For now though, he isn't a hunter, but a father picking up his daughter instead. After a small fight in the car, he drops her off to meet with her friends. It is in this venue that we learn of a desire to be in a romantic relationship, to find someone who truly understands and will care for her despite being deaf. Maybe it isn't romance that she wants, but someone to accompany her on a lonely journey. This is further solidified when she pays a visit to a dentist and tries to seduce the doctor, and inevitably gets kicked out. As she returns home disappointed, she is approached by two police officers who inquired about the whereabouts of her father. They passed a note containing one of the officers' numbers, asking for her father to call when he is free. A brief encounter that will change Chieko drastically. Her love was captured by one of the police officers after all. We then see her prepare for the concert, and in this scene we see a glimpse of the news, showcasing the mugshot of the perpetrators of a recent tragedy. The mugshots were of Yusuf and his family. This was their happy ending, an ending where they survived. While an ending to them, it was merely a piece of modern media to Chieko. She then proceeds to wait for her friend to arrive at the house, and when that time do come, she excitedly ventures out into a noisy world. Friends of friends greet her at the festival, and before long, bonds are forged between themselves as they connect through teenage bliss. Entering the concert after their escapades, the same teenage bliss bared with thanks to Chieko, turning to something more degrading. She stared at a friend through the flashing lights and the blaringly muted and loud music. Her foot grounded in place as a friend's tongue explored the lips of a boy that she brought along with their escapades just before the club. A boy that Chieko herself was interested in. As the disgust settles in, she escapes to her home and makes a decision to communicate with a particular someone, the detective who came to visit her earlier in the day. As he enters the house seemingly understanding Chieko's sign language, she confesses about her mother's death, exclaiming that she jumped off the building when her father was asleep. Although shocked and sympathetic, the detective was not here regarding her mother's death, but instead for information concerning her father's gun. Information that was displayed on the wall as one of her father's many memories that was stuck in time. The picture displayed the father posing with the gun beside a familiar man, the same man that sold Yusuf family's a gun. He reassures her that her only guardian is not in trouble with the law, and with the misconceptions buried, he asks to leave, to which Chieko refuses and instead asks him to wait. With slight hesitance, he agrees, and when Chieko returns, her body is rid of clothes. She approaches him, desperately trying to connect with him. Unfortunately, he cannot reciprocate her feelings for him. Visibly frustrated by his gentle rejection, he cries. Consoling her, the detective receives a note from her, a note that she refuses to read in front of him. And just like that, he leaves the house. On the way down, though, he meets the father, and from a very brief exchange of words, the father reveals that the mother never jumped off the building, but instead shot herself, and that Chieko was the only one to find her remains. The detective walks into a busy restaurant, the tally in the back reporting of the discharge of Richard's wife Susan. Their happy ending is finally achieved. Though the reporter makes a mistake. It was reported that it was a terrorist attack instead of an accident made by a child. However, just like Chieko, the detective was not relatively interested in the news. Instead, he took out the note from his trench coat, the camera briefly flashing us with a small chunk of the note before cutting away from it, revealing his saddened face. Finally, at the same time, a door to a balcony is opened. The father stepped onto the balcony, and Chieko, fully nude, stood at the end, gazing at the metropolitan city in front of her. Slowly, her father approaches her. Could the conversation with the detective be foreshadowing? Before anything can happen, she embraces her father. As the camera zooms out, she finally finds a connection. This is Chieko's happy ending. This is where Babel finally ends.